The year was 1963. A British science fiction show called Doctor Who was in its infancy. Then along came a villainous group of monsters called the Daleks. These emotionless robots seemed to be the very embodiment of all that is evil. The Daleks immediately captured the imaginations of Doctor Who fans and probably gave nightmares to quite a few youngsters as well. And tonight we introduce you to the writer who, among his other credits, is the man who created the Daleks, Terry Nation. Terry, how did a nice guy like yourself end up inventing something as sinister as the Daleks?
I based them on my wife. No, I don't know. I remember very specifically that when we got to, I needed a bad guy in my story, and I wanted a robot. And I remember as a kid going to movies and seeing the monster, whether the Frankenstein monster or the mummy or whatever it was, and being frightened and loving it, but always being aware that it was a guy dressed up. And I guess it was the legs that did it. You know, there was a human shape there somewhere. However strange, it was still a human shape. So I wanted to take the legs off mine, take it away from any kind of human image. And that's how it got to have that rolling motion. I'd seen the Georgian state dancers, the Russian dance troupe, and the girls in the troupe did a wonderful dance. They wore long skirts that actually brushed the floor. And they moved in tiny steps, and they appeared to just simply glide around. I thought, what a wonderful movement that was. So that was part of the movement of the Daleks.
So the Daleks were ballet dancers.
Deep down where it really counts, yes, they are.
It's been said that because you grew up in England during World War II, that the Nazism, had some influence in the type of characters that you come up with for your villains.
Yeah, I've heard this too, and indeed I've probably contributed to it. I wonder whether it is after the event or before. I don't know. I certainly think that once I was aware of it, if I had been unconsciously aware of it when I wrote it, the moment I was consciously aware, I was able to go on writing the Daleks in exactly the same way. So maybe there is some truth in it.
It's been suggested that every time Doctor Who's ratings would begin to slip just a little bit, they'd bring in Terry Nation to write another Dalek script.
That's right.
Is this true?
Oh yeah, for a long time. Yeah, they'd. Frequently, every time there was a new producer came on, he'd almost take the vow, the pledge, that I'm not going to do it with the Daleks, I'm going to do it with the Daleks. Well, they would try, and the ratings would go down a little, and so we'd announce a Dalek show, and pow, the ratings would go right back up again. They were very popular.
Where did the name Dalek come from?
Again, filled with legends. I used to... It was such a question asked so often. And the answer was so dull, I invented one. And I said it came from the back of encyclopedias, D-A-L to L-E-K, and I saw it when I was looking. Not true. The real answer is the same old dull, boring one. I don't know. It just happened along. But do you know something, which I learned many years later from a newspaper article? The headline said, "What does President Tito of Yugoslavia and Terry Nation have in common?" And then it said nothing, because President Tito knows what the word Dalek means. In Serbo-Croat, it means far and distant thing. Isn't that wonderful?
That truly is.
It really blew my mind.
One thing that I understand wasn't too wonderful was the Dalek costume. I understand it was very uncomfortable for the poor people who had to occupy these things.
I think they got a little hot in there every once in a while, but at least they got to sit down to work all the time.
This is true. In your long-standing association with the Doctor Who series, you've had the unique opportunity to work with a number of different doctors. This is probably a very unfair question, but do you have a favorite?
Bill Hartnell, William Hartnell, who for me was the total personification of the irascible, scratchy old professor. I loved his performance, and of course, he was the first, and so maybe there's some things there, but yes, I loved his performance. Not to say I didn't love the performance of all the other guys.
Well, working with all the other guys, I mean, each doctor brought a different sort of characterization to the role. I would imagine you would have to adapt your scripts to the individual, or maybe not.
Yeah, I think probably... I always believed that the important thing was the strength of the story. And then as one saw the new Doctor beginning to give off little hints of how he wanted to play it, then you could add those. But I worked very solidly on the story and figured if the actor wanted to wear a scarf, And that's not going to affect my story in any way. If he wants to wear funny hats, that's fine too, but my story stays. So I don't think I made too many concessions to them.
You started in comedy, is that true?
Yeah. Yeah. I went out on auditions. I wanted to be a stand-up comic, and did some auditions and some, a few shows. And I did my best jokes, and they played to the same sort of silence there is in the studio right now. Nothing, nothing. You could hear a pin drop. It was, and I'd think, I've got to tell you, to get off, if you're a comedian and you've just done your best joke, where you intended on that wave of applause to leave the stage. Well, it wasn't like that, so you kind of slink off the stage, and you could hear your clumping boots as you left, and nobody clapped and nobody applauded, and so yeah, I was miserable. And then one of the people I was auditioning for said, "Listen, son, I've got to tell you, the jokes are very good. It's you that's terrible." And whilst that hurt deeply at the time, I was hungry enough to figure out that maybe I ought to sell some of the jokes to people who could really tell them, which I started doing. And a wonderful guy, great comic called Spike Milligan, gave me a break. He had a kind of an agency along with some other writers. And I went, and they represented me, and very soon I got a radio show, a radio comedy, and went from there to another radio comedy, and then into television comedy. And all stuff that I enjoyed, but comedy I thought was desperately hard. And I wanted to become a dramatist, a serious dramatist.
Well, now, was it hard to make the transition into science fiction?
Yeah. I know that I had made the transition. I had written a play, and still people had me slotted as a comedy writer. And I can't honestly remember. I know I did one of the early adaptations for a very early science fiction show in Britain. I adapted something from Isaac Asimov, I expect. And it was successful. And then when Doctor Who came along, there weren't a lot of science fiction writers they could call on. I mean, I'd also been catalogued as that by now, so they called on me. And I turned it down. I said I didn't want to do it. I thought it was a kid's show, it was a show for children, because it was in the classic children's spot at that point. And I was working with another wonderful comic called Tony Hancock at that time. And he and I had a dispute about a piece of material. I wanted him to do something, he wouldn't try it. And so we had a dispute. And I was back on the train heading for London and thought, oh my God, I'm out of work. So I called my agent and said, if you've not turned down that Doctor Who thing, then I'll go and talk to them about it. And that was that.
When you sat down to do your first Doctor Who script, did you have this feeling of, oh my gosh, where do I start?
No. No, oddly enough, I've been clearing out a garage this week where there are huge piles of boxes of my material. And one of the first things I came across is yellowing and mildewed, but it is the storyline I submitted for that first Doctor Who story. And it's very good. It's really very good. I enjoyed it. It's a good, strong story.
Okay. Well, while you're cleaning out your garage, let's talk about your creative process. You were telling me earlier you don't do research for your programs.
Not for science fiction programs, certainly, no. I always believe that the nice thing about being a science fiction writer is that you create a whole set of circumstances, a series of worlds, and you perhaps settle on one planet. Now, I've created that planet. I don't want science or people who are smarter than me to say, oh, no, that can't happen, that can't be, because it's my planet. I made it. Anything that happens on that planet happens because I say it can. So for this little time, you become God. And if trees talk, then trees talk because I said they did. If rocks roll, then they roll because I said so.
Well, you have this sort of anything goes ability when you write a science fiction script. Like, for example, Genesis of the Daleks came along long after the Daleks had been introduced.
Mm-hmm. And I've had some being called over the coals for that a few times, saying that I've messed up the entire continuity of the lifetime of the Daleks, which is not true. See, I am simply an interpreter of history, and history is seen from many different viewpoints. So I, with new knowledge of the Daleks, was able to write a truer history of them when I did. And if you believe what I just told you, then...
What, in your opinion, goes into a really good Doctor Who story? What has to be there?
Terrific adventure yarn right from the off. I think it has to be fear, because I think we have always traded a little in fear. People hiding behind the couch to watch the show. They used to do that. Follow the Doctor is the important thing, and tremendous adversaries. He, the Doctor, his stature is enlarged if he beats big villains. No good beating little villains. You've got to beat big villains. So the bigger and stronger they are, then the greater he becomes. So I want good, original villains, lots of danger, but most of all a real old-fashioned story that goes from A to B to C and finally to Z, that actually tells a story in good narrative form.